It's now my pleasure to introduce you, Maya. Dr. Maya Matthews from the European Commission. She has a background from Oxford University and from London University in Master of Health Policy. She has 20 and more years of experience in EU and global health policy and issue and management. And 8 years ago, to my understanding, she joined the European Commission in Brussels, and she's now heading the division that is in charge of EU HTA. So thanks very much, Maya, for joining, and the floor is yours.
Will someone do the slides? I will do the slides. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was saying to people I was on the plane with that I've been to Berlin many times, but I've never seen it in sunshine. So I hope that this is a good omen for what I'm about to present to you. So as Jörg said, I'm heading up the department in the European Commission responsible for this wonderful HTA regulation. And it keeps us all very busy. But as I say to my colleagues, we are really on the cusp of a very innovative and new approach, and also really collective policy making, I call it. It's full of complexity because of so many different organizations involved. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, because I don't know how many of you are very familiar with this. I'm sure some of you are studying this carefully, maybe others not so much. The HTA regulation has had a very, very long birth. Many of you have been involved at the time when it was member states working together in a project-based approach. Then there was a service tender. The famous UNETA is really at the heart of everything we're doing now. And after many years, it was decided that it was very important to try to make this into a legislation, to really to be able to use all of the experience and all of the years of hard work and working together and finding ways to bring HTA evidence and methods and to a kind of EU level. So we will, finally, after quite a few years of negotiations with the European Parliament and with the Council of Ministers, the HTA regulation was adopted in very late 2021. I think the date is also significant because we were in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was a very important signal to show how Europe can work together on health issues. So I think it was also, we need to see it also in that context, that with the pandemic, it became very clear that there are very clear subsidiarity issues, but where there is a political will, it's also in everyone's benefit to work together on this. And so the HTA regulation is now in application, which means that now all of the preparatory work over all of these years is actually now being implemented. And its birthday then, its zero birthday, I would say, is on the 12th of January. And just to remind you a bit about the idea is really to create an environment, to create a framework for member states to cooperate on different health technologies and their assessment at the union level. And it's really about data and evidence and how to interpret this and to work together on this joint clinical assessments. It's also about efficiency and lack of duplication. So as you know now, you submit to member states and the dossier is different for each member state, or the requests are different, the timing is different. So the idea here is for the industry to have a clearer, more predictable and easier, I would say, route, because there is only one submission needed. And then also for the member states to work together on the assessments and to share a little bit the burden of work. And so we have this assessor and co-assessor approach, but all of the member states are involved, and it's the member states as a whole that take the decisions on the joint reports. And ultimately, the idea is to try to improve patient access, to accelerate this period between authorization or certification for the medical devices and actually the access and coming onto the market. So it's very exciting because I think it brings together a lot of the challenges that we're facing at Europe on health systems. It's about the sustainability of health systems, but it's also about how we can cooperate more, learn from each other, create economies of scale. And interestingly enough, the scope of the regulation combines medicines and medical devices. And today I will be talking about medical devices. So just next slide, please. Yeah. So just to recap, that the joint work, as it's called, is focused on this joint clinical assessment. Okay, and so that is the evidence part, the clinical part. It's assessing the relative effectiveness, the performance, the safety compared of a product compared to another one that's available on the market. But there's also, and I know that for the medical devices industry, this is something that's very important. What goes hand in hand is the joint scientific consultation, because we see very much the health technology developers as partners in this process, and so an early dialogue for scientific advice is crucial. And so the idea is that we're doing this in parallel. It would have been, if we'd had a kind of magic ball, we would have maybe started first with joint scientific consultations to build up the process and knowledge. But it was decided by the co-legislators that we start the joint work all at the same time. And as I said before, that this joint work, this assessment, this scientific analysis is carried out by member states, mostly HTA bodies, but in some countries where there isn't an HTA body, there's a department in the Ministry of Health. And I'm very happy to say that we have our co-chair of the coordination group here, Marco Marchetti, that will speak after me. And I can say that it's really wonderful seeing the amount of commitment that the member states and engagement that the member states are putting towards this. I work very hard, but I work very hard because they also work very hard, and we're all doing this together. So there's really a sense of purpose, and that we will do this. So in the regulation also, this joint clinical assessment report, which gives you the clinical aspect, is a key part then in the evaluation at national level. And the idea is that the joint clinical assessment report will then be used, and in the legislation, the member states need to also explain how it's been used in their national evaluation, in their national HTA process. Next slide. And then the scope is very interesting. So as I said, I think everyone recognized when they were negotiating this regulation that we need to start on medical devices, that it was important. The member states all wanted some work to be done on medical devices, but they also recognized that it had to be done slowly, in a very slow and steady approach, because there is not as much precedent, there's not as much experience of doing HTA on medical devices. So the idea is really that for the medical devices and the IVDs, it's a very small starting point. The pool of choice of selection is very small. So it's basically the class 3 implantables, the class 2B active devices intended to be administered or removing medicines, and then the class D IVDs. And not only, so that's quite already a big pool, but from that big pool, it would only be, you could only choose those devices that have an expert panel opinion or views for IVDs. And then on top of that, the coordination group will select based on specific criteria that is laid down in the regulation. So as you can see, it's really starting very small. And I think that's important, because sometimes people are getting worried that, oh my goodness, there's going to be all of this stuff. It's going to start very small, because it's important that we learn together how we do this process. So the next slide is on the selection. Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, this differs from the medicines, whereas the medicines, there is already, it's linked very much to the regulatory process, and it's a staggered approach, starting with new oncology medicines, ATMPs, and then moving on to orphans. Here, we're given, the member states and the Commission are given much freer range to select. And so the selection of the medical devices that will be subject to the joint clinical assessment will happen through a Commission implementing decision, which will be based on a recommendation from the member state HTA coordination group. And the selection criteria that I mentioned to you has to be taken into consideration, and that's the selection criteria. So there is scope for kind of real discussion amongst the coordination group on from this small pool already, which ones should be subject to JCAs. Next one. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight about how this system is going to work. The regulation is actually quite prescriptive about how we operate. So I haven't seen many EU legislations that actually say that there needs to be a dedicated IT platform, that all of the work has to be done in this IT platform, and that's very much for security reasons. So we have developed, the Commission has developed a very secure system. And all of the work, because we understand that this is there might be some confidential, commercially sensitive information, all of the work is carried out using this IT platform. So the members of the coordination group and its subgroups have access to this IT platform. They complete certain tasks, and all of this is done in this secure environment to reduce the risk of, like, you know, sending emails, etc. And there are two workflows in this IT platform. One is for the joint clinical assessment, and one is for the joint scientific consultations. Then basically in the regulation it also says that the procedural rules, so the more detailed rules about how this will actually operate, will be drafted by the European Commission with the approval of member states through so-called implementing acts. And I wanted to talk you through a little bit about these implementing acts, because they've really set the enabling conditions for this work. So we have two horizontal implementing acts, and again, these are the first of their kind. So one of them is the cooperation with the European Medicines Agency, because again, especially for the medicines, we are starting at the same time as the marketing application. And so this means that there is sensitive information, commercially sensitive information that has not yet been published. And so for the security and peace of mind of everyone, we created an implementing regulation which clarifies very in step what information is shared by the European Medicines Agency to the HTA Secretariat in the Commission, and how that information is used and who sees it, etc. Again, just to give this kind of security to all the actors involved, that the information that we have is being treated very, very carefully. And then the second horizontal implementing regulation is a regulation on how we manage conflicts of interest in this joint work. This was an issue that was a big discussion during the negotiations, because it was felt that for these joint clinical assessments to have the robust and veracity for the national level to use them, they needed to be done free of conflict of interest. And so we established an assessment process, how we assess conflicts of interest, and this task was given very much to the Commission, with the view being that it's the member states who are doing this work, this assessment work, the joint clinical assessment. And so we're talking about all of the representatives who are mostly civil servants, employed in the HTA agencies. They all will have their conflict of interest checked and assessed, and their declarations of interest forms will be available on the Commission Europa website. And the same is true for individual experts, clinicians who will also be consulted. For patients, because of data protection and sensitivity, we will check their conflicts of interest, but we cannot publish the names of the patients on the website. But it will be mentioned that 2 patients were consulted and their conflicts of interest were checked. And then, so these two horizontal regulations kind of create the framework, if you like. And then on top of that, there are two specific implementing regulations on medical devices. One is on this joint scientific consultations. This was already adopted in January, and this just goes through the different steps that will be taken. These implementing acts are really there to provide guidance to all of the different actors in this quite complicated process. So we're talking about the HTA bodies, the different subgroups of the coordination group, the European Commission, the European Medicines Agency, the patient and clinicians, the organizations through the stakeholder network that we have, as well as the health technology developers. And then in parallel, the HTA coordination group develops guidance documents, which are much more linked to the methodology, to how the group itself works, how they will assess the products. So that's a little bit because people ask what is the difference between the guidance that the coordination group are doing. They provide then more detailed. So the Commission implementing regulations try to provide a kind of big structure, and then the coordination group can detail in further guidance. Next slide, please. So for the joint scientific consultations, I'm very happy to say that we will be starting that work this year already. So the activities for medical devices will start in June. We will launch on the Commission website, and we will probably do a short press release as well about opening the request period for health technology developers. The request period will be open from the 2nd to the 30th of June. And as I said, we're starting small because we think it's important that we don't want to raise expectations. And so we need to make sure that the system that we've never really done before, we worked very closely with GBA. GBA has been the front runner, and UNETA before that, working on this joint scientific consultation. But it is different when you're doing it within a legislative process. So we need to really make sure that now the step from a kind of doing this on a project basis to a legislative framework is met. So the first batch, let's say, for the request period, in the annual work plan of the HTA coordination group, it said that there will be 1 to 3 joint scientific consultations for medical devices, which will be selected. And also, I think it's an interesting thing, and we're also working with the expert panels, there is the possibility for the health technology developer to request a parallel joint scientific consultation. So this will then be done with the expert panels. We are expecting some more guidance documents to be adopted by the HTA coordination group in April. And these will be the briefing document templates that have already been adopted, but other guidance is expected, such as the request template and the JSC selection guidance and JSC procedural guidance, to give you more insights on that. And as I said, all of this information is available on the Europa webpage. And then maybe you're interested to know a little bit about where we are with the joint clinical assessment on medical devices. So we are now currently in discussion with the member states HTA committee, and we are discussing the implementing regulation. We have had early reflections and discussions with within the HTA coordination group, its subgroups, health technology developers, notified bodies. We've had 2 meetings on medical devices within the stakeholder network. And once we have a stable draft of the implementing regulation, it will be put to public consultation. And we will also make a short press release on that so that everyone has the opportunity to send your comments. And if all goes well, we then hope that we will be able to start planning the joint clinical assessments in 2026. And as we said, that the guidance documents which are also being developed, but the coordination group is waiting for the implementing regulation to be more stable to work on the guidance documents because they have to be aligned. So this is also in the in the bag. So yes, so just to recap, the state of play here is that for the joint scientific consultations, we're starting in June. And for the joint clinical assessments, we're currently working very hard to meet the deadlines, as I mentioned, to have it available before 2026. And for the next steps, just to say that, as I said, these are the things you should look out for, that the public consultation on the draft implementing act, the opening request periods of the joint scientific consultation starts on the 2nd of June. And I wanted to just also highlight that we are organizing a HTA conference on the 2nd of July, which will be looking at the first 6 months of the application period, but also inviting other speakers, people to see a little bit about where HTA is. We've also invited some international speakers to see what's happening at regional level around in different parts of the world. And as I said, please, we try to be transparent and update our website on the Europa website about the HTA regulation implementation. Thank you very much.